These lectures are not designed for use as medical references to diagnose, treat, or prevent medical or mental health illnesses or trauma. If you have questions about the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of a medical condition or mental illness, you should consult your personal physician or other mental health professional.
As a relatively new dad, I've been reintroduced to storyboard books, those little square books with big pictures and sometimes big ideas, deceptively wrapped in cute nursery rhymes. "Oh, the places you'll go," chimes Dr. Seuss. "I think I can," huffs and puffs the little engine that could. "A person's a person, no matter how small," Horton tells the Who's. Our cultural delivery devices are busy at work planting cognitions and rules for living in little minds. Welcome to our introductory lecture on cognition, where we'll first demonstrate basic tools, then set ourselves up to do some thought records. Along the way, I encourage you to think of the origins of your cognitions, or maybe how to manage the cognitions being fed to your little ones. Exposure is inevitable and can be beneficial, but we may also need to provide an antidote, or at least a supplement. Today, we're going to move over to another corner of the CBT triangle and begin talking about cognitions. Our thoughts, memories, predictions, assumptions, and rules of living will all be part of this process. As with behavior, we'll begin with the basic skills in this lecture, then work our way up to more advanced cognitive skills in the next lecture. It'll be important to keep those behavioral skills in mind because, as you'll see, they're all connected and you'll want the ability to jump back and forth as the situation requires. So what is it that we mean by cognition? Well, there are quite a few types, so I'll list just a few examples. Cognitions would include our attitudes about ourselves, others, the world, the beliefs that we hold, generalizations, stereotypes, our implicit biases, any scripts we have, schemas, expectations, attributions or explanations that we have about why things happen, good or bad, appraisals about stressors, about our ability to cope, about other people, our intuitions, our judgments, assumptions, automatic thoughts, quite a long list. Now, a behaviorist would say thoughts are nothing more than mental behaviors, but let's avoid that diversion and get down to what really matters: identifying cognitive content and cognitive processes, then figuring out exactly what we can do about it. First, let's look at cognitive content, and we'll start by a quick exercise. What just crossed your mind in this instant? The emotion might have been curiosity, boredom, amusement, confusion, or something else, but what was the thought? Maybe you noticed something in the background set or heard something. Maybe you noticed my shoes. Maybe you picked up on the noise of a car going by outside. Maybe you have a song running through your head. Whatever it is, it's cognitive content. It's the thoughts, words, images, smells, sensory experiences, memories, all the stuff that pops up, often uninvited and often disperses unexamined. The content is fragmentary, irrational, and sometimes just downright stream of consciousness bizarre, but it's our content, and it has the potential to influence our mood and our behavior. Our first foundational skill, then, is being able to tune into our cognitive content. Next up will be cognitive processes, or how we take these data, these widgets, and process them to make meaning or to arrive at a decision. People are not computers. We're predictably irrational, depending on the circumstances. Now, dual process theory tells us we have at least two distinct systems for cognitive processes, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the quick, automatic, and intuitive system. This is the one that gives us a hunch or an instinct. It's responsible for the decisions we make in the blink of an eye. It's not good or bad, it's just quick and it's prone to errors, but it saves us tons of time and tons of energy. System 2 is very slow, careful, and rational. It's the system you would use when calculating your taxes or when you're carefully weighing the pros and cons of taking a new job. It's not good or bad, but it's slow and it uses a lot of energy. When we're talking about automatic thoughts, those thoughts that just pop into our mind as we go about our lives, we're usually talking about System 1, and then the shenanigans begin. So why do cognitions and why do cognitive processes matter? Well, I'll ask you to recall the CBT triangle where we have emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and they're all interconnected. If we want to understand or to change our behaviors or our feelings, we might need to tune to our cognitions, both the content and also the process. Let's now turn to look at our first clip. We're going to be going back to David, our 73-year-old gentleman who's had a recurrence of cancer. He's having a lot of thoughts, as you might imagine. Let's see where he goes with it. So David, today we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about cognitions. We've covered a lot with behavior, with behavioral activation. So let's think a little bit about the other side of our CBT triangle. And maybe a way to start that is to look at our CBT triangle first. Just to remind you, up at the top we have emotions. So if the goal is to manage stress, to manage anxiety, to manage depression, or to bring more positive emotions, we want to look at what influences those. We look at the two other corners of our triangle. We have thoughts or cognitions on one side, and we have behaviors or activities on the other. We know that the behaviors you engage in, activities with your wife, doing things that you enjoy, help to influence your emotions. And cognitions have the same kind of power. So it's not what you're doing, it's what you're thinking, or maybe even what you're thinking about what you're doing that gets added into the mix and helps us to understand why you feel the way you feel. If we make changes in thoughts, just like if we make changes in activities, we might see resulting changes in emotions. So let's talk a little bit then about cognitions, but I want us to remember that even though this is a fairly simple model, and like a lot of psychology, it's very individually focused, this doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? There's a context, there's a foundation that's under it. The foundation is the world in which we live. It's the family that you're connected to. It's your pre-existing beliefs, but it's also your biology. And in your case, there are some very real, very serious medical problems that are going to be sort of reaching up and influencing this dynamic. They limit your activities that you can do, but they will also push your thoughts in a certain direction. You mentioned before when the pain grabs you, your thoughts sort of run with that and go in a negative direction, and you feel more anxious or depressed about it. So as we talk about these, let's keep in mind there's a foundation there. We're doing what we can to work with your medical team to help you get good pain management and management of other symptoms. But it's part of the picture and something that we should consider as we go forward. So what did we see here? I like this clip because it does a few important things. First, it reminds us that we don't live in a vacuum. We have a context, a foundation, our past, and our present. It also reminds us that we're biological beings that may be coming into this at very different starting points. Let's continue. So why don't we look at cognition? So when I say the word cognitions, like what do you think of? Like what pops to mind?
Well, I'm not even sure. Just to me, initially I would have thought thoughts, but it's more, it's deeper than that. I guess it's how it all kind of goes together. But being aware of certain things, cognition, I guess.
Sure. So you're on the right track. So let's flesh it out a little bit. So cognitions are thoughts. So you're absolutely right. There's thought content, so specific beliefs, that we might have about ourselves, about others, about the world, about whatever. But there's also thought processes or cognitive processes. So the way that we manage information, the way that we weigh pros and cons, the way that we come to decisions. But it's not just thoughts. So thoughts can sometimes be like, things we say to ourselves, sentences, that we have in our head. It can also be memories. It can be predictions about the future. It can even be images, or sometimes we get a song stuck in our head. That's a cognition, but it's music. It's something that it feels like we're hearing it, right? So it's really all that mental activity. It's the stuff that makes humans so interesting and so incredibly complicated and wonderful and frustrating all at the same time. So what we want to do is to help you to raise your awareness of what's all the stuff that's going on up there. How does it affect your mood? How does it affect your body? And are there ways that we can maybe nudge it, shift it, or completely rewrite it so that you get better outcomes? Thoughts are neither right or wrong, or true or false. I think of them as helpful or hurtful, or maybe balanced or unbalanced, fair or unfair. It's important to first check your assumptions about thoughts. Thoughts are opinions, and thoughts can be changed. They're heavily influenced by our mood, our environment, by our activities, just as our CBT triangle tells us. Here are a few more examples. Now, anxiety is often about the misperception of threat and the underestimation of your coping ability and/or supports or resources that you might have at your disposal to help with coping. Depression is usually about the perception of a real or symbolic loss. It can spin out of control when it's paired with negative core beliefs, intermediate beliefs, automatic thoughts about yourself, others, and the world. So let's go back to this idea of cognitive content and see how we can start capturing content. Let's see how it worked for David, then come up with some general tips and tools. What are some common thoughts that sometimes just pop to mind?
Sadness is the first thing in this particular, in my situation right now.
Okay.
And I think about, I can be a pretty melancholy person, so, and I think about the good times that I've had with my family or something like that. It kind of makes me sad in many respects because I think about where I'm going,
Okay.
And I don't know how to describe it. It seems like it should make me happy, somehow.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I'd like to get in touch with is if I could have those thoughts become more of a...
Okay. So let's pause there and pull things apart a little bit. So when I ask about sort of what cognitions do you have, what popped to mind for you was an emotion, right? So sadness is an emotion. It has an important function. It's something that we all experience. It often tells us that a loss or an anticipated loss has occurred or will occur. So what I've done is I've drawn sort of 3 columns here, and as we talk about these, I'm going to start help you sort them into columns for thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So you can get in the habit of sort of pulling these things apart and seeing what are the thoughts that are related to which emotions, which are related to which behaviors. And you gave us a couple of good examples. So for emotions, I'm going to write down sadness, but you also said happiness too. And that seemed more aspirational at this point. You're hoping that you can get there.
Yes.
And the thoughts it sounded like reminiscing about happier times or healthier times, or so reminiscing. And that's cognitive activity. So you're activating memories of past events, and they are evoking, in this case, sadness, right? Because there's another thought that comes up, and it's, maybe this is never going to happen again. Maybe this is the last time I will have seen that person. The trajectory that I'm on is going to limit the positive memories that are yet to be created.
Yes.
So there's this process, right, that's happening. You remember something, it should be a happy memory, and you feel sad because there was that extra cognition that was in there. And it's almost sort of an anticipation of loss. This is a helpful clip because it shows us that there are often thoughts underneath the thoughts. These things come in layers, and I often feel like an archaeologist digging through layers of sediment. Each layer gives us an important clue. But let's nail down our cognitive model and exactly why we think our cognitive tools will work. Recall in our behavior lectures, we talked about the ABCs: antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. Cognition and cognitive processes work in similar ways. We have a trigger, maybe an event or a sensation, which brings up a thought, or maybe a whole series of thoughts. And while we can look at consequences, rewards and punishments tied to thoughts, they're not as obvious and they carry a lot more complexity and nuance, particularly since they can be an exclusively internal experience. With cognition, the strategy is usually a little different, namely because there can be so many layers of thoughts that require analysis before we can change or accept them. So let's look at the basic model. An event or antecedent triggers an automatic thought. Quick, uninvited, could be positive, could be negative, helpful, hurtful, you name it. Keep in mind our CBT triangle that tells us that thoughts, including automatic thoughts, are related to behavior and mood. Now, if we think about the traditional model, we might say or think something like, my spouse made me angry. It's the event or the exchange that caused a particular emotion and then maybe a behavior that followed. But in the cognitive model, it inserts a very simple but important middle step. My spouse did something which I interpreted as insensitive and selfish, and then I became angry and withdrawn. It's that middle step that's so important. In this new cognitive model, it's still about the trigger, but it's also about how we thought about or interpreted the trigger, the meaning that we gave to it. Recall the last clip with David. He was remembering positive memories with friends, and he said that it made him sad. It wasn't the memories, it was the extra thought that he might not see those friends again, and he may never make memories like that again. So let's go back to the toolbox and start thinking about how to address thinking. Now, in order to change a thought, you first have to catch it. And we usually start at the surface by trying to catch or eliciting automatic thoughts. Here's a couple of tips. We might use an emotion as a signal to look for an automatic thought. It's almost as if a flare has gone off telling you, rewind the tape, reflect on what you were thinking just prior to feeling that emotion. You might consider scheduling times during the day when you're actually going to sit down with a piece of paper and write down some of the thoughts that you've had over the past period of time. You want to think about events or behaviors that are maybe tied to particular cognitions. Things you did, things you didn't do, rewind the tape and think about what you might have been thinking just prior. You might use guided imagery. Here, if you're someone that thinks more in pictures than words, you'll want to put words to those pictures that go through your head. And another strategy to do with another person is role-playing in the situation so that you can begin to evoke those thoughts. Now, one process we use to identify cognitions when working in a therapy session is called guided discovery. Emotion is a warning signal, or a flare, as I mentioned. We ask people, what were you just thinking when that emotion came across your face? What was it that went through your mind when you were talking with your spouse? We ask them to consider the time course. What were you thinking right before that event happened? What were you thinking during that event? And what have you thought since that event occurred? We ask them to follow up on initial thoughts. Great, you captured that automatic thought, but what else were you thinking? And what else were you thinking? And what else were you thinking? And what do you think this meant? Dig a little bit deeper. We might use guided imagery in sessions where we would ask things such as, close your eyes and recreate episode XYZ. Where are you right now? What's going on around you? Create those rich sensory experiences so that you can have people remember the thoughts, the emotions that they were feeling at that particular time. Now that you've captured a thought, what do you do with it? Well, first you write it down. And writing is important to slow down and to control this process. It's really another form of self-monitoring, but here the data you are collecting are cognitions. Next, we need to evaluate how you're thinking about this content. This is the cognitive processes. Let's start with some baseline cognitive processes we all share. You'll sometimes hear them called different things like cognitive heuristics, but I like to use the neutral term, habits of mind, as it conveys not just the process, but the idea that we develop mental habits just as we have behavioral habits. Habits of mind are by definition non-normative or just irrational. They include things like over-personalization, mind reading or imagining that we know what another person is thinking or we know their internal motivations, magnification or minimization, making things bigger, making things smaller, fortune telling, where we try to make predictions about the future, or sometimes we engage in all or none thinking or dichotomous thinking. It's either all good or it's all bad. We'll go through a much longer list in the next lecture, but now it's important to be familiar with these habits of mind because it helps us to see where our thinking went wrong. If we can see that we were selectively attending to only negative information, then we can more easily see what needs to be done to balance things out. Let's move to our next clip where we see Miriam is using a fairly basic but still powerful habit of mind, selectively attending to all things negative. And I thought that maybe we could just do a quick exercise, and there's no right or wrong answer here. Mm-hmm. So as you think about your drive over to the appointment today, can you describe things that you noticed?
Okay, so when I was coming out of my neighborhood, yesterday was trash day. Okay. And then we had a big storm yesterday afternoon, and people's trash cans are out, tipped over, they're on the sidewalks. It really looks unpleasant, in the neighborhood. And then there's so much traffic and people blowing their horns. And it was, where do you think people are going to go?
Yeah.
You know, I think that just creates more frustration for people. And then the construction brings it down, and I understand they've got to work on the road.
Sure.
So, but then that brings it down to 2 lanes instead of 4.
Makes the traffic
you're
worse.
right, you know. So it was just a lot of traffic and not really a nice day.
Parking?
No, parking wasn't good either.
I hear that one often. So,
find a parking space.
So trash, weather, construction, parking, sounds like you might feel a little jangled coming in and a little negative about all of that.
Well, right. It's not a good way to start the morning.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then we're going to get more thunderstorms, and so it's not going to be a good day this afternoon either.
Okay. So let's pause there, and thank you for sharing that, because I see it as a good illustration of the things that we carry around in our head that influence our mood. And when we talked about behaviors, we talked about each of those activities that we choose to do throughout the day adds a little bit more or takes a little bit away from our mood, and it's the sum total of those activities that influence the kind of day that we have. The same is true for cognition, so the things that we notice, the things that we perceive or pay attention to, the things that we remember and carry with us. Those are all cognitions, ideas, thoughts, memories. Each of those has a little bit of weight to it too, and they can either lift up our mood or they can push our mood down. Now, sometimes there's just a lot of negative stuff happening in the world, right? And it really affects our mood. But I would say, and this is a theory we need to test out, that at any given time, there are both positive and negative things happening around us, and it's up to us to decide what we're going to pay attention to and what we're going to carry forward with us the rest of the day. So if we were to rewind to your commute here, what were some positive things that you saw?
When I left my house, the trees are beautiful. The grasses enjoyed the rain. It's really dry.
Very green. Yeah.
Right, because it gets so hot. So the storm yesterday, actually, we needed the rain. And then when I got here, there were some nice people that were coming out of the building as I was coming in, and smiled, and we exchanged good mornings, and so they were nice. So there were some nice things, but it's I think I let the frustrations from everything else push that over.
And I think that's an interesting observation, and I think we'll probably want to design a self-monitoring exercise like you were before writing down the activities. We'll want to write down things that you notice, cognitions you have, things that you remember about your day. And again, the idea is we, although not on purpose, we oftentimes selectively attend to the things that are negative or pessimistic or dark or sad or threatening, and that leaves us feeling depressed and anxious and stressed out at the end of the day. But you are able to, with just a very little effort, to think of positive things too. And what if those were the things that we carried with us? Or just to be fair, think about the negative, but think about the positive too. So the sum total at the end of the day is a more accurate reflection of what you've seen and experienced rather than just the negative stuff that has, I guess, a stickiness to it.
Okay.
Another way to think about it, it's, especially when you're feeling depressed or stressed, it's almost like wearing dark glasses, and it filters out all the bright stuff, all the light stuff. And you see everything in a darker shade of gray or brown. We want to take those filters off so that you have a more accurate view of the world, including the stuff that's maybe positive.
Okay, look for the less of the negative and more of the positive.
Or just, be fair. Look at both.
Consider them both.
Yes.
Okay.
So what should you get out of this? I can think of at least a few things. First, selective attention is at play all the time, and it matters. Second, it's not random. Our starting mood provides a lens that drives our selective attention, then spirals, sometimes escalating or intensifying that mood. It's first about what we attend to, but then it becomes how we think about what we've attended to. These are the automatic thoughts, the appraisals, or interpretations. In the last clip, we chose to tackle selective attention first as a way to balance things out. Try it out for yourself and see what happens. So Miriam's cognitive process was to selectively attend to negative content and to exclude positive content. But there are other more complex processes and related erroneous conclusions that can be a bit more difficult for us to pick apart. First, we have to realize that we're making assumptions and not seeing facts. Let's do a quick exercise. I'm going to read a list of statements and I want you to categorize them as facts or assumption. Here's statement number 1. Jonathan decided to get even by not texting me back. Assumption or statement? I did not receive a return message from Jonathan. My mother complains about her health because she wants attention. My mother complained about her health. So these were pretty easy, but it's a mistake we make all the time on the fly. We interpret something and just assume that we're right. But what if we aren't? Let's say that you've now captured your automatic thought, and you've determined that you're drawing conclusions or making assumptions based on the automatic thoughts. Now what? This is the focus of our next lecture, but let's get you started. First, you might want to name it to tame it, or identify which habit of mind is being used. If you can see it as mind reading, then it's easier to beat. Let's try just a few examples. I'm always such a hot mess when I go out with friends. What's the habit of mind? Is it fortune telling, magnification, over personalization? There may be more than one at play, but I'd call that all or none thinking. There may also be some selective attention and emotional reasoning happening. Again, more on that in the next lecture. I would recommend printing out a list of all the different habits of mind so that you can become more familiar. Just Google CBT and habits of mind to see a few different versions of lists. The important part to remember is that there's always something we can do about the way we think. Let's turn back to David and see what he thinks.
You know, I think one of the thoughts I have that, and this may sound strange, but you know, because I will be dead, but once I'm dead, I think about what it would be like for the people who have to experience me dead, so to speak. You know, and I that really makes me sad, because it's not like I'll be around to experience my own death or something, but how would I feel? You know, and I've had that happen. I mean, obviously, you know, I've felt that emotion myself from a standpoint. You know, my mother passed away. So I think that's one of the things that really bothers me the most. Now I know they'll get over it, but
right. And what would you say is the emotion that evokes? Is it sadness or guilt or?
There may be some guilt in there, certainly. But I mean, sadness is the one I can think of the most. But
because they're your family, you love them, and we don't want to hurt the people that we love.
Well, right.
Even though we do.
No, I know. And I mean, I realize there's nothing I can do, and they realize there's nothing I can do. But nevertheless, it's, you know, you're leaving me type, you know, that they would be thinking that.
I want to bookmark that thought, there's nothing that I can do, because I want us to challenge that in a little bit. You're right, there's nothing you can do to, you know, wave a magic wand and the colon cancer goes away and you live on and on forever. But there might be things that you can do to enrich and to savor those relationships that you have. There might be things that you can do to help your family feel connected to you, that they're part of this journey. Again, you might not change the ultimate outcome or even the date of your death, but there might be things that you could do.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've done a quick tour of the initial tools we'll put in the cognitive section of our toolbox. We still have the necessary foundational knowledge of what are cognitions and why they matter, how they fit into the CBT triangle, and how they influence mood, social relationships, and well-being in general. We have the initial skill of self-monitoring, or being able to capture our own cognitions. usually our automatic thoughts. Remember that writing it down matters. It crystallizes the thought and allows you to examine it more closely. So we have tools to help us with cognitive content. Next, we need tools to help with cognitive processes. And the first that comes to mind is habits of mind. It's a long list that probably doesn't need to be memorized, but you do need to identify your preferred shortcuts, your personal habits of mind. Once you know those, you can be on high alert for them whenever they occur. We also added a tool to help us with the habit of selective attention. It is an attention manipulation that directs us to focus our attention on the positive elements of the present. Savoring is a similar tool. It redirects our attention to something positive that's happened in the past and directs us to re-experience and re-enjoy it. We've just started with a core tool, and it's really one of the workhorses of CBT, the thought record. More on that in our next lecture. Thank you.